Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Pacific Northwest Tribal Nations Drought and Climate Outlook webinar. My name is Crystal Stiles, and I'm the Tribal Engagement Coordinator for NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. If you're not familiar with NIDIS, NIDIS was signed into public law in 2006 and works across multiple scales of government with academia, NGOs, and public citizens to address the many challenges that drought brings. And one of the things that we do at NIDIS is provide drought early warning and support. And so given the low winter snowpack across the region this past winter, along with early snowmelt and recent warm and dry conditions, drought has begun to develop across the Pacific Northwest and is expected to continue to develop and intensify throughout the summer, which has implications for water supply and fisheries. And we're aware that fires are already occurring across the region as well. And so while we already provide support to our partners across the region, we recognize that tribes are sovereign nations and have unique needs when it comes to drought management and support. So we've developed this webinar with that in mind. So Karen Bambacco with the Office of the Washington State Climatologist will kick off the webinar with an update on recent conditions, as well as what the outlooks are saying. And then Stephanie Krantz with the Nez Perce tribe will talk about drought impacts on the Nez Perce Reservation and the tribe's response to drought. And so then for the last half of the hour, I will be leading an open discussion on what impacts you all are seeing on tribal lands and what needs you might have as you navigate this drought that partners can help with. So we can move to the next slide. So throughout the webinar, you can type questions or comments into the question box, and we can respond to those either publicly or privately. And the two presentations by Karen and Stephanie will be recorded. A summary and recording of the presentations will be available after the event at the link that is being dropped into the chat box. However, we will not be recording the discussion portion. So if you don't feel comfortable sharing on the webinar, you're welcome to email me. I think address is going in the chat if you have any questions or comments or any concerns at all. And so I also want to acknowledge that there have been several partners helping with this effort to bring drought early warning information to tribal nations in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm going to let these partners briefly introduce themselves. So we're going to start with my colleague at NIDIS, Jason. Jason, do you want to come on camera and briefly introduce yourself?
Hey, thank you, Crystal, and thank you for putting this together here this morning. My name is Jason Gerlich, and I'm the Regional Drought Information Coordinator for the Pacific Northwest and the Missouri River Basin. So I work closely with Crystal on bringing drought early warning to those specific regions. So thank you for putting this together, and thank you all of you for attending this morning.
Thanks, Jason. James?
Yeah, good morning. My name is James Rowley. I serve as a travel advisor to the NOAA NIDIS program. I'm a member of Rosewood Sioux Tribe and been involved with the NIDIS program since 2008. And I'm looking forward to this webinar. And thank you all for coming. Looking forward to a good discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Amelia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amelia Marchand. I work with affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians and the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center as the interim senior tribal resilience liaison. Happy to see all the attendees this morning, and thank you so much, Crystal, for bringing this together.
Sure. Thank you, Amelia. Holly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Holly Prendeville. I'm the coordinator for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Northwest Climate Hub and here to support NIDIS.
Thanks, Holly. Mead.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mead Crosby. I'm a senior scientist with the University of Washington's Climate Impacts Group and the University Director of the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. And I also co-lead, along with Amelia Marchand and the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, the Tribal Coastal Resilience Project for the Northwest Climate Resilience Collaborative. Really glad to be here this morning and to support this work. Thank you, Crystal.
Thanks, Mead. And Matt Laramie, I see you're on as an attendee. Adam, can we unmute him so that he can introduce himself?
Yeah, can you hear me, Crystal?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Matt Laramie. I'm a Regional Climate Resilience Coordinator for Bureau of Indian Affairs Branch of Tribal Climate Resilience. Just here to listen in, and our program supports a lot of drought response and climate change impacts. So very relevant topic here for us. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. I don't see Patrick Freeland on, but he is a tribal liaison with the BIA along with Amelia. So again, thanks all of you. I really appreciate the partners that have helped guide these efforts. One other thing that we did a couple of weeks ago was put together a drought status update specifically for tribal nations in the Pacific Northwest. It was released on July 10th, and you can find it on our website at the link that's being dropped in the chat. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, and now I will turn it over to Karen to provide her update on recent conditions and the outlooks. Karen?
Great, thank you so much, Crystal. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Bunbacco. I'm the Deputy State Climatologist for Washington, and I work at the Office of the Washington State Climatologist, which is located at the University of Washington. Really happy to be talking to you all today, and really mostly looking forward to the discussion part, so I'll try and keep this brief. What I'm going to be talking about today is just an update on sort of the weather and seasonal climate conditions that got us into where we are with our drought now, and a little bit about what we're expecting to see over the next few months. Next slide, please. So taking a look back at what we call the water year, so we're going back to October 1st of 2023. We have temperatures, so the departure from normal on the left-hand side, and precipitation percent of normal on the right-hand side. So for normal, we're using the period of 1991 to 2020, so the most recent 30-year period. And as you can see, we've been on the warmer side really throughout the entire Pacific Northwest. Oh, I did want to note, so for this presentation, I included the tribal nation boundaries on any map that I was able to add that to. But I just want to acknowledge that, of course, tribal decisions are frequently made considering land outside of those boundaries as well. They're just there as markers to kind of ground us on these maps. So as I was saying, we've been on the warm side, looking at the averages across some individual states. October through June was the 7th warmest in Idaho, the 8th warmest in Oregon, and the 15th warmest in Washington. And for those statistics, I'm going back to the 129-year record, so since 1895, to get those numbers for October to June. So on the warm side, the anomalies aren't quite as high because we're comparing it to a most recent 30-year period, but of course we know our temperatures are warming over the long term due to climate change. So precipitation below normal, especially across the northern parts of the Pacific Northwest, so Washington, the Idaho Panhandle, western Montana, see a little more, and apologies that these colors got a little bit washed out, but there are kind of that whitish color more in Oregon, so near normal precipitation for the water year so far. A few areas of wetter than normal are in the Pacific Northwest. Go ahead to the next slide, please. But what was really critical for this water year in particular was the lack of snowpack. So this is looking at all of those little dots on the map are individual sites that measure snowpack in the mountains. And then the area is averaged over those basins, which are those lines there. And this is looking at April 1, which is typically the maximum, the peak snowpack around the region, and especially in Washington and across the northern part of the Pacific Northwest, where our precipitation was slightly below normal. We're really seeing, or we saw below normal snowpack. Even where the numbers look better in southern Idaho and Oregon, I do want to point out, you can see kind of along the crest of the Cascades there's some of those dots are colored orange or red, showing still below normal snowpack, and those are the lower elevation snow tells. So still some parts that, even though the average looks good, some of the lower elevations were lacking in snow this year. So on the bottom, I put the statewide percent of median. So Washington was the worst out of the states with only 69% of median on April 1st. So low snowpack, Oregon was about normal, northern Idaho 74% of median, and southern Idaho about normal. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to describe, if you click one more time, Adam, I think an animation might show up. If it doesn't, okay, great. So I just wanted to show a little bit of how that low snowpack happened. So it wasn't really dry over the winter. It was really more of a temperature driven snowpack deficit. So let me explain. This is looking at average snowpack over all of Washington is what that black line is showing, going from October 1 to just a few days ago. And you can, and the shading in the background are the percentiles compared to the historical record. So we would want to be in the green area, which is normal, but we ended up hovering between the red and the yellowish color for most of the season. But aside from a really slow start to our snowpack season, we had a few high temperature events that really were detrimental to our snowpack. So one is circled there. The end of January, we had a warm atmospheric river move into the Pacific Northwest. It brought a lot of rain on snow. And then following that atmospheric river, we had much above normal temperatures that actually melted our snow mid-season. So you don't typically see that big of a melt, especially when we're talking like January and February. For Washington in particular, it took about a month for our snowpack to recover after that melt event. So it wasn't just that we weren't seeing the snow, it was the warm temperatures that were melting snow or causing it to fall more as rain rather than snow. Next slide, please. So Washington has a very specific process for declaring drought, and the state agency responsible for monitoring that is the Washington State Department of Ecology. And so in mid-April, just because of how low the snowpack was and knowing that some of the forecasts were showing expectation of warmer than normal temperatures continuing into the spring and summer, they declared drought for almost all of Washington state. So there's two thresholds that have to be met for a declaration to be made, and this is written in state statute. There's a hydrologic threshold where an area of the state is either receiving or projected to receive less than 75% of normal water supply. So for this year, it was certainly the snow that qualified as that. And then there's a hardship threshold where water users and the environment are expected to experience undue hardship because of the lack of water supply. So they made an early declaration this year, which turned out to be a really great call. And what happens when a declaration is made is they're able to expedite emergency water transfer applications. And then they also have a grant program that people can apply, not just any people, but to mitigate hardships to water users and the environment. So it's mostly for governmental agencies or entities of which tribes are included. So I can put a link in the chat about that when I'm done speaking. But as far as the rest of the region, because snowpack was looking good, at this point there weren't any other drought declarations made in Idaho or Oregon. In Jefferson County, Oregon did declare drought on June 27th, so more recently. I'll go ahead to the next slide, please. So after that drought declaration was made, there was a little bit of a reprieve in terms of our conditions. So again, we're looking at temperature on the left-hand side. These are departures from normal, and then precipitation percent of normal on the right-hand side. And this is going from April to June, so our spring period. We actually had some cooler temperatures across the region in some locations, averaged over that period, even some near normal temperatures. So that, I like to think of it as spring could have been worse. We did have some mid-May heat, but it was pretty short-lived. And we did see cooler temperatures afterward that actually eased the rate of our snow melt. So that was good news. But on the other hand, we really started to turn dry for spring. So you can see on the right-hand side there, especially on the eastern slopes of the Cascades in Washington and Oregon, across southern Idaho there, really just much less precipitation than usual. So less than 50% of normal, 25% of normal. And spring is a time where we still expect to see a good amount of precipitation. It's not a really dry season yet, So that was impactful for how the conditions were unfolding. Next slide, please. And then, of course, I'm sure this is fresh on everyone's mind. As we've turned towards July, we've really shifted our weather pattern. We have we had anomalous high pressure kind of parked over the region, bringing a lot of warm temperatures, totally dry conditions. So this is just from July 1st to 20th, temperature departures on the left-hand side, and really note the legend here. So that darkest red that got washed out to kind of a weirdish brown. But anyway, that's between 8 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. So a really strong, really high temperature anomaly for almost 3 whole weeks. And then on the right-hand side, precipitation has been very minimal. There's some spottiness here. Of course, that's thunderstorms. I could go on and on about the temperature records that were broken. I'll just mention a few, of course, Washington focused, because I'm biased towards Washington. But at Spokane, for example, they set 20 days and counting, 20 consecutive days of 90 or above. And that is a record going back to using their station there. Seattle set a record at 17 consecutive days, 80 or above. And I said 90 or above for Spokane, I hope. Just say that again in case I swapped that. Lots of triple-digit temperatures like Boise, triple digits in Western Oregon, even in the Yakima region. I was talking to some colleagues yesterday that were saying that Oregon is likely to break a record for the warmest month on record for July so far. So we'll see how all these records shake out when the month is complete. The other thing I wanted to point out here is just how dry it's been in sort of southern Idaho and eastern Oregon. So typically in the summer, they do get some moisture from the monsoon that can bring some precipitation, and that really has been non-existent so far this summer. Next slide, please. So with this rapid warming that we've seen in July, this is something called the EDI. It's an evaporative demand index. And this is just looking at the 2 weeks ending on July 19th. And you can see all those dark red colors. These are sort of color coded to match the percentiles that are shown in the drought monitor. And that darkest red is the worst 2% dryness. And this really just, the warm temperatures have kicked the drought conditions into high gear. We could call this perhaps a flash drought that's occurring now, where the landscape is drying really rapidly because of the warmth. And places such as Oregon and Idaho that were maybe a little less worried about drought due to good snowpack in parts of the state are seeing drought development now. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to briefly show what's going on with stream flow and soil moisture. So stream flow is 28 days ending July 21st on the left-hand side, and those are color-coded by percentiles. What has been sticking out to me and worrisome to me are those really dark reds on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. So that's less than the 10th percentile for stream flows already, and it's pretty early in the season. We're only in July to see stream flows that low. So expecting to see some more drought impacts emerge there. And then we can see, of course, all those orange colors throughout are below normal, even in Western Oregon, where things were looking better because they were seeing some precipitation, especially in early June. We're starting to see some below normal stream flows emerge there. Soil moisture, similarly, the recent warmth has dried out our soils across Western Washington, Western Oregon, Southeastern Washington, Northeastern Oregon. We can see some really low percentiles for soil moisture there. This is just one soil moisture product. They don't all agree. There's several different ways you can estimate soil moisture. We don't have a ton of observations, unfortunately, but definitely in the southeastern Washington area, a lot of the estimated products are showing very dry soils there. So I feel like that's a pretty strong signal. Next slide. So this is the drought monitor that just came out this morning. So this map tries to take the many different drought metrics and indices to make them into one map to see where it's going. I think it's likely a little underestimated, usually in flash drought situations. So what we're seeing in July. It takes a little time for that to show up on the drought monitor, but still, even with this being underestimated, we're seeing at least abnormally dry conditions, which is the D0 throughout the whole region. Next slide, please. So there's critical fire weather conditions happening as I'm speaking across a lot of the region. So really dry, windy. The National Weather Service has red flag warnings out for a lot of the region. This map is a little different than one I usually look at. I usually just look at Washington and Oregon, but I pulled this and I don't know exactly what all these type 1, type 2 command symbols mean, but every one of those dots is a fire in the region. So we can see, especially in Oregon, there's a lot of fires happening right now. British Columbia as well has a lot of fires going on. So with all these fires already on the landscape, definitely expect to see widespread smoke impacts as we enter into the driest time of the year here. Next slide. Okay, so neutral conditions in the tropical Pacific, the El Nino has ended. We've been in neutral for a few weeks to months now. And we are expecting to see a La Nina develop later this summer and into the fall. So that's what those blue bars are representing, the probability of a La Nina emerging. La Nina typically means a little bit cooler winter conditions, better snowpack for the Pacific Northwest. So I think we're all kind of eager for a La Nina to happen next fall. But the onset of La Nina has shifted a little later than what we were expecting a few months ago. So now looks like it might develop by the August to October period, perhaps September to November. And there's about a 1 in 5 chance that will just stay neutral, but still a higher likelihood of La Nina. I'm going to skip ahead just because be mindful of time to the next slide, please. So this is looking at the outlook for August from the Climate Prediction Center. These red colors are showing that we have a higher probability of seeing above normal temperatures for the month of August. So as we move inland in the Northwest, those chances get higher. The Olympic Peninsula, the coast of Oregon look like they could be not quite as, or the chances of above normal temperatures aren't high there at all. And then precipitation, it looks more likely that we're going to remain below normal precipitation for a majority of the Pacific Northwest. Next slide. And then this is the 3-month outlook going August to October. So this is certainly taking the developing La Nina into effect. You can see on the right there's actually a higher probability of above normal precipitation for part of the Pacific Northwest. And likely due to the expected La Nina development. But otherwise, inland Northwest, we're expecting higher chances of below normal precipitation. And then really throughout most of the region, except Washington and Western Oregon, we're expecting to see above normal temperatures too for that late summer, early fall period. Next slide, please. So in other words, we're not expecting any drought busters happening, although I will note it looks like we could get a real wetting rain this Sunday and Monday, but I always defer to the National Weather Service on the timescales that short. Anyway, so just to quickly summarize, to give Stephanie plenty of time, we're seeing the water year to date above normal temperatures, more regional variability in precipitation, but that precipitation has turned really dry over the last 90 days for a lot of the region. The lowest totals relative to normal are in eastern Washington and parts of southern Idaho. The above normal July temperatures and the heat that we've seen has really changed conditions quickly, brought on some flash drought, and we're seeing those deteriorating conditions in our stream flows and soil moisture. And then finally, we are expecting a La Nina this fall, and it's a factor in our late summer, early fall predictions. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I'm encouraged that hopefully La Nina is on the way. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Karen. If you have any questions for Karen at this time, please feel free to type them into the question box, and she can answer those during Stephanie's presentation. But before we go to Stephanie's presentation, Patrick Freeland was able to join us, so he is going to introduce himself. Patrick?
Dzisiaj Stongo, Patrick Austin, Freeland Judge Epidos, Amaligro, Logio Clomas, and Casita Clomas. My name is Patrick Freeland. I serve as a tribal climate liaison with affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians and with the Northwest Cask. And apologize for the late introduction, but glad to be here. And thank you, Crystal, and the NIDIS team and others for your leadership in this work.
Sure. Thanks so much, Patrick. Okay, we will now turn it over to Stephanie to talk about drought impacts and response on the Nez Perce Reservation. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Good morning, everyone. Taksmewi. Thank you, Karen and Crystal and everyone for putting on this webinar and for giving the Nez Perce Tribe a chance to share how drought has been impacting us and some of the things that we're doing. It's an honor to be presenting today. First of all, I'm the climate change coordinator for the Nez Perce Tribe. I've been working here for about 8 years, and my position was formed after the 2015 drought and fish kill. And this introductory slide shows some of those impacts, from forest fires across the reservation and lost houses and lives on the line to, you know, dry stream beds in places where creeks are normally perennial with stranded fish eggs and, you know, mud flows that came after the fires. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to introduce you to the Nimipu. The Nimipu are a proud and resilient people whose territory is centered in the Columbia River Basin and Northern Rockies. Their usual and accustomed areas stretch all the way from Yellowstone to the mouth of the Columbia, where they have fish hunted and gathered since time immemorial along their seasonal round. The Nez Perce Tribe has worked tirelessly to protect the species and places that matter the most to them, and they have a rich and deep and beautiful culture. Next slide, please. I wanted to show some of the tribal geographies on a map here. The red circle is around the Nez Perce Reservation. The usual and customed areas stretch a big ways, but the actual Indian Claims Commission territory is about 14 million acres, most of it in north central Idaho and some overlapping Washington and Oregon. And, you know, just reflecting on Karen's map, it's interesting to see her map because of some of the impacts that we have been experiencing this summer. There wasn't much precipitation. It's been very hot. We've had temperatures over 99 degrees here where I live for 20 days. And last night we had a thunderstorm came through and set off a bunch of new fires. So this map that's here that shows some tribal geographies in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana shows the fire map as of yesterday morning. This morning there's a bunch of new fires, including many close by in the areas that Karen showed that are so dry in eastern Washington. And also, ironically, we also had flooding. So low elevation areas got all the water from the high elevation areas and the fire starts. So the creeks are flooding, the roads are down, stuff is on fire, and people are scrambling this morning to take care of that. And I know that, you know, many of our sister tribes and relatives across the Northwest and the globe are dealing with these impacts. And my heart goes out to you, especially people on the Colville Reservation, who I know are on fire now, and others who could be dealing with fire this morning. Next slide, please. Obviously, droughts and extreme events have been affecting all tribes. The Nez Perce Tribe has dealt with wildland fires, with high winds that have set off fires by, you know, interacting with power infrastructure, landslides and mud flows after these fires, or just because everything's so dry that there's not enough vegetation to hold things together. Lots of agricultural impacts and losses, dead livestock, dead pets, dead horses and whatnot because of high temperatures and drought, and wildlife die-offs, you know, hemorrhagic diseases and whatnot in deer during these exceptional droughts and heat waves. And then, of course, the air quality, the smoke, the harmful algal blooms, the low flows, the low dissolved oxygen, the fish strandings and whatnot. And of course, you know, big impacts to tourism and recreation. tribal members hunt, fish, and gather in wilderness areas, and it's been hard for some people to do that because of smoke. And then some of the fruits that people gather have been tainted by smoke, and then it's hard to get out and get in your fish and game quotas for the year for your families and community when things are not great in the wilderness or not safe. Next slide, please. So the Nez Perce Reservation actually has pretty high risk of fires and floods because of the topography of the infrastructure of the reservation and the location of our infrastructure. This is a figures from our climate vulnerability assessment looking at where all of our infrastructure is in relation to these canyons. And it's like the stream and the river is in the canyon bottom, all the inputs into those canyon bottoms come along the roads where the infrastructure is, and then we have roads washed out, communities on fire, people unable to evacuate, and we've done some very specific things to try to address that. And then this is from the wildfire risk to communities, showing that the Nez Perce Reservation itself is at greater risk than 92% of tribal areas and counties in the United States. Next slide, please. This is a little panel from my cell phone from the Pacific Northwest heat wave of 2021, and we've got a repeat of that right now. But this was, record breaking, as we all know, many excess deaths, including in our case some tribal members. And on June 28th, on the 4th day of the heat wave, there was a small fire near Waha. On June 30th, it was 122 at my house, and at the high school down the street, the official record was 117. And then, within days, these wildfires exploded and many evacuations, homes burning down, all the things. And so this combination of droughts plus heat wave plus, the thunderstorms and windstorms that have come after the heat waves have left have really set things on fire and affected our air quality here, as I'm sure it has for many people across the West. Next slide, please. So, some of the most devastating impacts have been water quality impacts because of lower flows, reduced stream pact in general. There's lower dissolved oxygen, less water quality for fish. It's hard for fish to get to Idaho because they're ducking into cold water refugia on their way up and waiting it out and starving instead of coming up here to lay eggs. And then in fisheries has been moving fish and trying to build low flow channels to help fish get to their breeding grounds. And, like that first picture, we've had fish eggs just in dry creek beds too. And last year we had a tremendous harmful algal bloom on the lower Snake that stretched 30 miles on these hydroelectric reservoirs here in our territory. That was just devastating. Next slide, please. So some of the things, maybe just keep pressing because I think there might be an animation problem. Yep, keep going. Sorry, I forgot to remove animations. So the tribe has been doing a lot about all of this, all of it. This is the tribe's activities, some of them on a timeline showing the rising levels of carbon dioxide since 1990. The tribe's first official climate change project was this forest carbon offset project that they completed in 2010, where they planted trees for carbon credits and tried that out. And then in 2011, the Water Resources Division authored this Clearwater Subbasin Adaptation Plan that has kind of started the foundation of climate planning at the tribe. After the 2015 drought and fish kill, I was hired, and it's sort of been all hands on deck with the climate change task force. There's staff across the tribe that have been part of this task force in forestry, air quality, emergency management, wildlife, cultural resources, water resources, etc. And now the tribe has a climate change and energy subcommittee that is devoted to trying to deal with some of these impacts. And my coworkers have been very busy and have been working on these projects to try to make a difference. And this is just sort of an example. I can't talk about all of this today, but if you have any questions, please follow up with me later. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, I want to thank our Nez Perce Forestry and Fire Division for fighting fires. They are all very, very busy. These are some of the things that we're doing, you know, and have been doing for a really long time. So between FireWise education and fire prevention education, and then, you know, training firefighters and fighting fires and lending our support to other communities that are in fire, like there are a lot of Nez Perce heroes and other tribal heroes that fight fires every day. And here's a picture of just a few of these folks. And, you know, thanks to their wise leadership and the help of the USDA Climate Hub, we've got a climate change vulnerability section in our forest plan, and then a draft chapter in our vulnerability assessment. We have been working with the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest on this Good Neighbor Agreement for a long time, and now the Nez Perce Tribe is helping to reduce fire risks in our forest through this agreement. And here's a quote from our chairman about this agreement that I think says it all. The Nez Perce has been a steward of its land and resources since time immemorial. The Good Neighbor Agreement is an affirmation of the tribe's expertise in managing our homelands and an additional intergovernmental tool to improve watershed health and fish and wildlife habitat. So, you know, this is from our former chairman, Sam Penny. Our current chairman, Shannon Wheeler, is also an incredible climate leader. Next slide, please. So one of the things that my coworkers in the Water Resources Division have been doing is studying past data from stream gauges and putting in new gauges in order to measure our minimum stream flows and see if we're meeting the standards that were set in the Snake River Basin Adjudication Agreement. And it turns out that our streams are over allocated, and you know, for some of these streams, 90% of the time, minimum stream flows have not been met. And my coworker Allison is presenting right now to the Department of Environmental Quality about this, because we've been protesting water rights to try to increase the amount of water in our streams and to really stay on top of these climate impacts on flow. Next slide, please. The Wetlands Program has also been doing some innovative work. We built a climate smart, culturally smart toolkit that includes climate change predictions and sort of resiliency in tree planting design and forbs and shrubs to try to increase the amount of food and forage that's available over the full year. That toolkit is available to other tribes. And it should work in the inland Northwest. My coworker Rue Hoover has worked on this Wetland Ecosystem Services Protocol toolkit as well, that has been adopted by, I think, the state of Idaho and others to try to look at the functional assessment of wetlands, and is part of a wetland mitigation banking effort to protect wetlands. And my boss gave me something very specific to say about this. Our wetlands program is advancing towards in lieu fee compensatory mitigation projects, a method of compensating for unavoidable impacts to streams, wetlands, and other aquatic resources caused by development, road construction, and other projects. In these projects, a developer pays a fee to the tribe to cover the expected costs of replacing lost and degraded wetland functions. The tribe then uses these funds to identify, plan, and build and maintain conservation projects at mitigation sites to restore, enhance, and preserve the resources. This is crucial following the Supreme Court decision in Sackett versus EPA, which removed many federal protections for wetlands. In addition to this, the BIA just awarded the tribe this wetland resilience prioritization grant. You know, because we are a checkerboarded reservation, it's very difficult given our jurisdictional situation to figure out where we can do big restoration projects. And we really think that wetland restoration is a critical part of building climate resilience and resorbing carbon, because, you know, wetlands hold more underground carbon than any other habitat on Earth. And the Earth Economics did a study for us that they're going to present at the National Tribal and Indigenous Climate Conference this fall about the process of trying to have wetland carbon credits. So I'm pretty excited about that. Between 1780 and 1980, 56% of Idaho's wetlands were lost. And I know California, the number is more like 91%. So wetland mitigation is important for fish and wildlife, and we're really excited about the work that the Wetlands Program has been doing. Next slide. In addition, you know, the tribe has really worked with local farmers, with the EPA and the BIA and our non-point source pollution program to increase no-till acreage on the reservation. And this project has been hugely successful. It started in 2002, and now 80% of the tillage type harvested acres being farmed on the reservation are complete or partial no-till. The surrounding landscape has only a 20 to 30% adoption rate, so that really affects water quality in this area of the basin, and we'd love to see more, barrier lowering projects to help other farmers adopt these techniques that protect soil health. The tribe also has a climate smart agriculture project. We're part of this climate smart commodities projects through several entities to try to improve soil health in the region. And in addition to that, local area farmers are taking the lead in applying some of these techniques to their land, and they've had huge success. This is a picture from the Hasselstrom farm during the 2021 drought. They harvested a crop. They harvested garbanzos and wheat and a cover crop that they hayed and grazed their sheep on. And they haven't put anhydrous ammonia on their land for a couple decades. They've been working on this for a long time, and they're really heroes in the local soil health movement, and just the most wonderful people right here in Winchester, Idaho on the reservation. And they have inspired their neighbors to try this bioactive system that helped them weather the 2021 drought and not have to use crop insurance like everybody else. Next slide. We're also, based on the success of some of these farmers, we're actually doing a research study with the University of Idaho. This is led by Tara Hutterberg and Dr. Eric Walsh and others. Graduate students have been doing this work to study sort of a mixture of different cover crops and manure management systems and manure applications in a grid on this farm near Weippe, Idaho. And we'd like to do more of this type of research. And the first year, the cover crop mix wasn't the greatest and soil amendments were needed. And so this year, the research study added soil amendments, did the same treatments, and we're expecting some interesting results in the coming months. So I'm happy to share more about this. And then I've also put this little story map that our project partner, Eric Walsh, created for this project. Next slide, please. One of the key concerns of nez perce gatherers has been the impacts of climate change to traditional foods. And unlike, fish and wildlife, there really isn't a traditional plant office and federal effort to document the impacts of climate change on traditional plants. And some researchers have started to do this. We have a partnership with Willow Resources and Brian Endress at Oregon State University to try to start looking at these traditional plant impacts in our region as the Umatilla has, and taking the same protocol and applying it across a larger area. The BIA just awarded us some funding to continue this work, and some of this work is part of this Camas to Condors landscape level climate change adaptation project that I don't have time to talk about today, but I'm very excited about it. We got an America the Beautiful grant to continue this project, and there's some incredible leaders working on it. So basically, we're trying to work with land trusts to educate them about the need for traditional gatherers to access these private protected areas in a changing climate, because in many cases, the best remaining gathering habitats that were tended by the ancestors to the Nimipu are in these private conservation and public lands. Next slide, please. And finally, I think I'm not quite sure how to say this. The Nez Perce tribe was the only tribe, incredibly, to win the general competition for the climate pollution reduction grant. And first of all, it's a little humbling and embarrassing for us, and we don't really understand why we prevailed, but we are just blown away and overjoyed about it. And my coworker Julie Simpson and I worked very, very hard with our subcontractor Measurement to put together this priority climate action plan with staff across the tribe, and to sort of distill all of their passion and their work over time and their hopes and dreams into this plan to try to get funding to help people cope with some of these impacts. And we won an award for $37 million, which is incredible. And it's going to go to some things that really make people's lives better and make them safer during these wildfires. So for instance, you know, part of it will go to climate ready housing. We'll do energy audits on 650 homes and wood stove changeouts for 350 of those homes to reduce their energy use, in addition to wraparound services, insulation, doors, windows, HVAC systems that can heat and cool their homes. And, you know, couple that with Solar for All funding to put solar panels on the home and add a battery so that when the power goes out, they can still pump water from their wells and fight fires, especially for homes that are isolated and have to shelter in place and can't evacuate because their roads are forested and it's just not safe. Obviously, wildfire comes with power outages for us. And then it will go towards making our casino and off-grid resiliency center so that people can go there during evacuations or emergency management, and reduce our energy costs so that we can reinvest money in more climate mitigating projects that are hard to fund, and also to a big solar array and EV charging and battery on the Joseph Fisheries office so that we have another remote resiliency center. We also applied to the tribal only competition for electric vehicles and charging stations, and this is part of the tribe's commitment to ending the climate crisis while lifting people up. In this image as well, there's a photo of some of our solar installers that installed the solar in the community on all of the houses in the community center and whatnot. And it's been a really great partnership between the tribe and Revolution to get this work done. And yeah, so we are incredibly thankful to the EPA and to all of our federal, state, local, and tribal partners, and you know, hope to lift all tribes up on our quest to end the climate crisis. Next slide, please. The Nez Perce tribe has a vision of a resilient future, of connected landscapes, of reconnected landscapes, and of humans reconnected to landscapes and to ecosystems, and to the need to protect these ecosystems and to preserve biodiversity as we face this climate bottleneck, of healthy, clean, safe water and air and food that is abundant for fish, wildlife, and human beings, of a thriving culture and all the respect and pride and beauty and wonder and wonderment of this incredible culture and these cultures throughout the Americas and around the world of Indigenous peoples. Local food production, local energy production, and energy and food sovereignty and sustainability for all. One of the quotes that I've repeated in other talks that we got through our surveys about community well-being when we were first trying to understand what's happening here and what can be done and what people want is this quote: "I really believe when you're working in the area of protecting Mother Earth, you are a warrior." And I know there are many climate warriors amongst tribal communities that are trying so hard to protect so many species, and that NIDIS can do a lot to help us, and that it's really worth it for us to, you know, express what we need and see those tribal geographies on more maps, and, you know, have the resources we need to make our drought resiliency plans and work together. Next slide, please. So, you know, last but not least, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our funders and partners, and to all of our relatives, and to other tribes for their inspiring work, and to our ancestors. I really appreciate, you know, you all being patient enough to listen to me, and I know everyone on this call is really looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you. Katsiyaw.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was great. If you have any questions for Stephanie, you can put them in the question box. And before we move into the discussion, which I realize we only have a few minutes left now, I just have a few more things to mention. So again, a summary and recording of the presentations will be available after the event. We've prepared a resources page. You can access it on this webinar's event page. You'll also see the link will get dropped into the chat as well. This page has links to Climate Partners web pages and email addresses. It also has other links to information and tools that you may find useful. And I also wanted to make you aware that a drought status update for the Pacific Northwest is expected to be released today. You should be able to pull it up at the link that's next being dropped into the chat box once it's available. It's not specific to tribal nations or tribal lands, but it could be very helpful. So I encourage you to check it out. Also, NIDIS will be hosting another webinar on conditions in the Pacific Northwest on August 26th at 11 a.m. Pacific. If you want to register for it, please see the link in the chat box that's being dropped in. This one's also not specific to tribal nations or tribal lands, but it could have a lot of useful information. And so finally, if you would like to get region-specific information so that you know when these drought status updates and webinars are taking place, you can sign up for the NIDIS Pacific Northwest Drought Early Warning System listserv. If you sign up for this listserv, you will get an email when the webinar summary and recording are available. We also have a tribal engagement newsletter that's national in scope, and it provides information relevant to tribal nations on drought and related topics. So you can even sign up to get email alerts on changes in drought conditions at your location or when new outlooks are released. You can scan the QR code here on the slide. You can sign up via the link that's being dropped into the chat there, or you can just simply email me and I can add you to whichever lists that you would like. So we are going to stop the recording now and begin the discussion portion of the webinar.